Hey there! Welcome to Sleepy History Secrets, the channel where history takes off its hat, leans against the bar and quietly admits it wasn't as glamorous as the movie said it was. Tonight, we're heading west, to the land of dust, whiskey, and the kind of optimism that only makes sense before reality arrives. Our story drifts through the real Wild West of the 1870s, a place of dirt floors, dangerous work, and decisions made mostly out of desperation. Not the heroic, slow-motion version from the screen, but the quieter, rougher truth of people who are just trying to stay alive for one more sunrise. Before we begin, if you enjoy these calm wanderings through humanity's bad decisions, take a moment to like the video or subscribe, only if you truly find comfort in the absurdity of history. And when you're ready, drop a comment telling where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's oddly soothing to see this little campfire of people scattered across time zones, all half awake together. Now, maybe dim the lights, let the air hum softly in the room, and settle in. The West can wait a few moments. It's not going anywhere, and neither are we. If your mind drifts while we travel, that's perfectly fine. You'll still wake up somewhere on the frontier, probably cold, definitely tired, but still alive, for now. Our journey begins at dawn, with a smell that could end careers. You open your eyes to the 1870s American frontier, and immediately regret it. The smell hits first, heavy and complex, as if every odour on earth agreed to meet in your room at once. There's a note of animal, a suggestion of human, and an undertone of something no one has had time to identify. Bathing, you'll quickly learn, was considered a monthly luxury, if that. Some folks skipped entire seasons, reasoning that if dirt came naturally, perhaps it belonged there. You sit up on a straw mattress that's still moving, not from magic, but from the colonies of bedbugs that own the place. They don't bite every night, only when they remember you exist. The air feels stiff with cold. If it's winter, your breath leaves ghosts in the room. The fireplace has gone out. Fuel's too precious to waste on warmth while you sleep. If it's summer, you'll sweat through every layer you own. The frontier never promised comfort, only equal opportunity misery. You stretch and find muscles you didn't know you had, all of the making. Labour here is a full-body religion. You don't commute to work, you wake up inside it. Farmers plough, miners dig, ranch hands ride until they can't feel their spines. Everyone bends under some kind of burden, and everyone accepts it because stopping is the only thing worse. Most settlers are stooped and arthritic before they ever see 40. Life expectancy isn't so much a number as a dare. You look around your cabin, a masterpiece of necessity and bad luck. One room, dirt, floor, smoke-dark walls. The roof leaks when it rains and still somehow leaks when it doesn't. Furniture is whatever could be dragged, traded or built by hand. There's no privacy. Everyone sleeps in the same space. Family, guests, occasionally livestock, because heat and safety come from proximity, not preference. Outside, the world waits. The horizon feels endless, though it's filled mostly with wind and consequence. You dress in what passes for clothing, rough canvas pants, a shirt that could double as sandpaper, and boots already half-eaten by time. 2 outfits are plenty. Washing clothes uses water, and water is life. Dirt isn't a stain here, it's membership. Breakfast awaits. Beans, biscuits, and something that claims to be coffee. It's been boiled past redemption, bitter enough to taste like regret itself. If you're lucky, there's salt pork. If not, there's more beans. Fresh fruit and vegetables are rare enough to be rumours. Vitamin C deficiency, scurvy, makes gums bleed and teeth wobble free, but no one knows the cure yet. Losing your teeth is considered part of the ageing process, like wrinkles, only louder. You drink your coffee anyway. It's bad, but it's hot and that's enough. Before stepping outside, you remember to check your boots. Snakes and scorpions like to borrow them overnight. It's a local tradition. A quick shake may save you an exciting morning. When you open the door, the wind greets you first. Cold or hot, it never stops. It carries dust that settles in everything: hair, food, lungs, dreams. The landscape is both magnificent and hostile, a painter's paradise and a farmer's sentence. The sun rises like a promise it doesn't plan to keep. You think of the word freedom, and it feels heavier than it used to. The nearest town lies a few miles away, if your horse cooperates or your legs don't give out. The streets there aren't paved but churned by hooves into a fragrant blend of dust and manure. Sanitation isn't a civic duty, it's an aspiration. Disease moves faster than gossip, cholera, typhoid, smallpox. The cure for all three, according to popular wisdom, is whiskey. Occasionally whiskey works, mostly by making you forget what the problem was. You pass a saloon, a one-room structure with more flies than furniture. No swinging doors, no piano, just wood, smoke, and men who measure time in drinks. The whiskey is raw and often experimental, a mix of alcohol, pepper, tobacco juice, and sometimes kerosene. The stronger it burns, the more it sells. A single glass might blind you. The locals consider that part of its charm. Violence simmers under every conversation. Guns are everywhere, but not for dueling, for hunting, signalling, or keeping animals, human and otherwise, at a polite distance. The famous gunfight at high noon almost never happened in real life. Most shootings were unplanned events between people who had already stopped making good decisions. Drunkenness, boredom, and fear are a potent mix. Even the peacekeepers are part-time employees of chaos. By midday, you realise the truth. The Wild West wasn't a story about heroes. It was about endurance. Quiet, grim, unremarkable endurance. People didn't conquer the frontier. They survived it by inches. Every day was an arm wrestle with the elements, and every night a small victory celebrated by staying alive. The myth, it turns out, hates you just enough to keep you interesting. As the light fades and the air cools, you feel a strange calm. You've made it through your first morning, cold, hungry, dirty, but still breathing. For now, that's success. The wind hums outside, steady and unbothered. Tomorrow will ask for the same fight, and the day after that. You settle onto your creaking bed, the bugs resuming their evening shift. Somewhere far away, a coyote laughs, and you almost laugh back. Sleep, if it comes, will be brief but well earned. Out here, that's the closest thing to peace. You wake again, though morning might be too generous a word for it. The sky still pale and uncertain, the kind of light that doesn't yet know what day it wants to be. The cabin smells faintly of smoke and something else. Maybe damp wool, maybe despair. It's time to get dressed, which sounds simple until you remember what you have to wear. Clothing in the Wild West wasn't about style or comfort. It was a form of armour. Thin, itchy armour that protected you from everything except irritation. Men owned maybe 2 sets of clothes, one for daily work and one slightly less filthy for Sunday. The nice outfit was often just the least stiff with sweat. Women, meanwhile, wore layers that could double as punishment: chemise, corset, petticoats, long dress, apron. If you were lucky, a shawl to keep off dust. If you were unlucky, the shawl caught fire near the stove, which happened more often than anyone admitted. Everything you own chafes. The canvas pants rasp against your legs, the shirt feels like sandpaper, and the boots, heavy, stiff, and somehow always damp. Remind you of yesterday's mistakes. They're filled with dust in summer and ice in winter. Still, you tie them tight because walking barefoot here is less a choice and more a cry for help. Buttons, when you have them, are mismatched or improvised from bone, wood, or whatever could survive being dropped in mud. The fabric smells of smoke and work. Laundry is a rare event because water costs sweat and soap costs money. Clean clothes mean you've either just survived a flood or buried someone. Outside, the wind tugs at your sleeves like a bored child. It carries a dry rasp. a mix of sand and sound that coats your tongue if you breathe too deeply. The landscape has no patience for comfort. If the day's hot, it's the kind of heat that melts thoughts. If it's cold, it's a lesson in humility. There's no ideal weather here, just degrees of endurance. You learn to accept that your clothes will never quite dry and your hands will never quite stop cracking. You start your day's work before breakfast because the chores don't care about hunger. Maybe you're hauling water from a well, chopping firewood, or feeding animals who look better fed than you. Sweat mixes with dust until you're coated in a fine crust, like bread dough left out too long. Your back aches, but you move anyway, because stopping invites the chill back in. When breakfast finally comes, it's not the cheerful meal you remember from paintings. It's beans again, maybe salted pork if yesterday's luck holds. The beans are bland and sticky, the biscuits dense enough to be used in construction. You drink coffee boiled until the pot itself looks exhausted. It's black, bitter, and made from grounds that might have seen water before. Some settlers added crushed eggshells or salt to make it taste less like despair. It didn't work. Still, the caffeine does its quiet miracle, not so much waking you up as convincing you not to give up. Fresh fruit and vegetables are rare outside harvest months. Oranges are almost mythical. When someone produces one, people gather just to smell it. Vitamin deficiency, though no one knows the name, makes joints ache and gums bleed. Teeth loosen, hair dulls, energy fades. It's not starvation, it's a slower, quieter betrayal by the body. But people don't complain. They just chew more beans and keep going. Complaining doesn't grow crops. Sometimes you hunt. If you're lucky, you bring back rabbit or deer. If you're unlucky, you bring back a story about the one that got away. Hunting takes time, bullets, and energy, all three more precious than the meat itself. Preservation is another trial. Without ice or refrigeration, you salt, smoke, or dry everything. The salt burns your lips, the smoke burns your eyes, and the taste of preservation becomes the taste of life. You start to forget what freshness was. Some nights, you dream of crisp apples or bread that bends. For most families, the diet is whatever doesn't kill you today. Cornmeal mush, hardtack dried beans, and pork fat. Simple, repeatable, reliable. Butter is a memory. Milk turns before you can finish it. Sugar is gold. Spice is a legend. People talk about pepper the way you might talk about treasure. In a world this bland, flavour is a form of hope. At midday, you pause to rest. Though rest here just means work you can do while sitting down. The wind brings the smell of something cooking in a neighbour's cabin. You can't tell if it's bread or just burning wood. Either way, it's comforting. You share a few words. Gossip travels slower than disease but faster than mail. Someone's horse died. Someone's wife gave birth. Someone else hasn't been seen since the storm. You nod, sip water that tastes faintly of iron, and go back to work. By afternoon, your clothes are stiff with sweat and dust. The sun presses down like a physical weight. There's no shade except what you make. You stop noticing discomfort after a while. The body adapts. It always does. The trick is convincing the mind to follow. You think about how people in the future might imagine this place. Brave cowboys, noble pioneers, golden sunsets. You smile faintly. The sunsets are real at least. Everything else is marketing. When evening comes, you peel off your outer layers. They land with a sound that could be described as solid. You shake the dust from your hair, knowing it'll settle again by morning. The smell of cooking drifts through the air. More beans, more pork, more sameness. But you're too tired to care. The food fills your stomach, if not your soul. You chew slowly, half asleep already. Outside, the sky's a wash of orange fading into violet. The first stars appear, distant and cold, like the eyes of someone watching history from far away. You finish your meal and sit in silence, the wind soft around you. The fabric of your clothes clings to your skin like a second layer of fatigue. but you've survived another day, fed, clothed, vaguely upright. Out here, that counts as victory. You lean back and listen. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote calls. Somewhere closer, a horse shifts in its stall. The air smells of smoke and salt and everything you can't afford to forget. You close your eyes. The world is still turning, indifferent and immense. Tomorrow, you'll wake to the same chores, the same clothes, the same sky. But for now, under the fading light, it's enough to breathe. If you follow the thread a little further, the weather itself becomes your next opponent. Vast, unpredictable, and entirely uninterested in your plans. You begin to notice that the West doesn't really have weather. It has moods. Some mornings the wind hums like a lullaby. Other days it arrives screaming, determined to rearrange the furniture and your faith in God. The frontier climate isn't polite or predictable. It doesn't change with the seasons so much as it spins a wheel and laughs at the result. Whatever the sky decides, you're expected to survive it. If it's winter, the cold crawls through every wall. The fire you lit before bed died in the night, leaving behind a few sullen coals that don't look interested in helping. The cabin air bites your face. The water bucket has frozen solid, and the frost inside your window has designs more intricate than any artist could paint. You step outside and the world feels brittle, like glass that could shatter if you breathe too hard. Snow crunches underfoot, but there's no soft romance to it, just the sound of distance being measured in pain. Your coat, made from something that once walked, only partly remembers warmth. Every breath feels like inhaling knives, and if it's summer, you long for those knives again. The heat comes heavy and close, thick with the smell of sweat, manure and dust so fine it gets in your teeth. There's no shade except under a hat that traps the heat you're trying to escape. You work anyway, hauling water, chopping wood, keeping animals alive, because stopping isn't an option. The sweat dries too quickly, leaving salt crystals on your skin. Your lips crack. Your throat feels like sandpaper. The world glows in shades of yellow and misery. In spring, it rains like the sky's apologizing for something it did last year. The downpour turns roads into rivers and cabins into aquariums. The roof leaks in several places, so you place buckets to catch the water. They fill too fast. The floor turns slick and you slip twice before breakfast. Still, you try to feel grateful. After all, water is life here, even when it's trying to drown you. When the clouds finally clear, everything smells of wet wood and mould, an aroma you'll later come to associate with home. Then there's autumn, which begins with a sigh of cool air and ends in a scream of wind. The crops are gathered, the nights stretch longer, and the storms come with lightning that cracks open the sky. Thunder rolls for miles, shaking the walls like an angry landlord. You count the seconds between flash and sound, as if that will make the distance feel safer. It doesn't. A stray spark could set the prairie alight. One bad fire and everything you own, house, food, memories, turns to ash in an evening. Some towns have burned down twice before anyone thought to store water. Out here, there are only two kinds of weather, the kind that kills you and the kind that's practicing. You learn small survival rituals. Keep a blanket near the bed. Keep kindling dry. Bank the fire at night so it smoulders without burning the house down. In summer, hang wet cloths over the windows and pray for a breeze. In winter, seal the cracks in your walls with mud or straw and hope it lasts. The frontier offers no insulation except determination. Some mornings, you wake up with frost on your eyebrows. Some nights, the air inside the cabin feels warmer than your thoughts. You develop a relationship with wind. It's the only constant presence, sometimes gentle, sometimes cruel, always whispering through the grass or howling through the rafters. When it blows from the north, you brace for cold. When it swings from the west, you smell dust before you see it. Great moving clouds that swallow the horizon. Dust storms can turn day into twilight in minutes. People lose their way between the barn and the house, disappearing into brown fog. The air fills with grit so thick it grinds between your teeth. You close your eyes, cover your mouth, and wait for the land to calm down. And then there are tornadoes, those sudden fits of atmospheric bad temper. They appear with no warning, twisting down from the clouds like the finger of an angry god. They flatten barns, uproot trees, and scatter your life across the prairie. Survivors crawl from cellars into silence, the sky suddenly clear and innocent again. It's hard not to take it personally. Every kind of storm carries its own music. Rain drums on the roof in uneven rhythms. Wind whistles through the cracks like a flute out of tune. Thunder growls in the distance. At night, when the world should be sleeping, these sounds replace conversation. You sit by the fire, staring into the flicker, listening to the elements rehearse new ways to test you. In a strange way, it becomes comforting. At least when the weather is loud, you know the world is still there. Sometimes, when dawn breaks after a storm, the land feels washed clean. The air is sharp and bright. You step outside, shoes sinking into mud, and watch the light spill across the plains. The sky stretches forever, impossibly wide. For a moment, it feels worth it. The cold, the heat, the danger. The horizon glows like something trying to apologize. You almost forgive it. You begin to understand that the weather isn't the enemy, it's the teacher. It strips away vanity and convenience, leaving you with raw existence. You stop expecting comfort and start admiring survival. The frontier doesn't reward optimism, it rewards stubbornness. And there's something oddly peaceful in that. By evening, the air shifts again. You feel it in your bones before you see it, the change of the next mood. The wind rises, carrying the scent of rain or the taste of dust. The light fades, the world turns the colour of iron, and you prepare for another night of listening to the sky rearrange itself. You seal the door, check the roof, and whisper a quiet joke to no one in particular. If the weather had a face, you'd probably punch it. Still, beneath the fatigue and the dread, there's a small wonder. Out here, nature isn't background. It's everything. The same forces that make life impossible also make it unforgettable. The wind, the cold, the heat, the storms, they don't hate you personally. They just don't notice you exist. Somehow, that makes the stars feel closer. As darkness settles again, the wind hums through the cracks like an old song. You pull the blanket higher, close your eyes and listen. The world is still restless, but at least you're not alone in your discomfort. Outside, the first raindrops start to fall, soft at first, then steadier. The sound is strangely soothing, like the land itself breathing. You'll sleep tonight if the roof holds, and if it doesn't, well, at least you'll be clean by morning. The path now carries us toward the nearest town where civilization offers its own kind of danger. Quieter, perhaps, but no less fatal. When you finally decide to visit town, it isn't because you want to, it's because you have to. The frontier has a way of forcing your hand. Nails, flour, matches, news, everything you can't make yourself waits somewhere down that dusty main road. So, you saddle up or hitch the wagon, hoping the horse hasn't decided to die this week, and you set out. The horizon seems to retreat as you move toward it, as if the town isn't sure it wants company. From a distance, it looks peaceful enough. A handful of wooden buildings, a few signs hanging crookedly, smoke from chimneys curling into the sky. Civilization, or at least a sketch of it. But the closer you get, the more the illusion peels away. The smell reaches you first. It's the scent of people living too close to animals, with nowhere for the waste to go. Horses line the street, tied to posts that have absorbed generations of urine. Chickens wander freely. Dogs fight over scraps. The ground is a mixture of mud, manure, and whatever leaked from the last wagon to pass through. You can tell how long it's been since the last rain by how deep your boots sink. The street isn't really a street. It's a path that decided to stay put. There's no paving, no drainage, just ruts carved by wheels and hooves. In summer, the dust rises in clouds that sting your eyes and fill your mouth. In spring, it's all mud. If you fall, you don't get up cleaner. People cough as they pass each other. The sound isn't polite or apologetic. It's a background instrument, like the wind or the creak of wagons. Every throat here tells a story of dust, smoke, and the slow march of infection. Buildings crowd together without any clear plan, each one built wherever its owner stopped walking. Roof lines lean like drunks supporting each other. Wooden signs advertise blacksmiths, barbers, and undertakers, sometimes all in the same building. The barber's chair doubles as the dentist's seat, and the undertaker doesn't charge for repeat customers. The frontier makes multitasking an art form. There's a general store near the centre, the town's beating heart. Inside, it smells of molasses, kerosene, and loneliness. Shelves sag under tins of coffee, tobacco, and hardware. The prices are a kind of joke. Flour that costs a week's pay, sugar that costs a prayer. Still, people buy what they can. The shopkeeper keeps ledgers as if debt were a friendly sort of disease. You greet him. He nods, and the two of you cough in perfect harmony. It's the closest thing to small talk you'll get. Outside, a doctor's office leans against a saloon, as if they've accepted their partnership. The doctor's tools are old, his hand steady only because shaking would waste energy. He treats everything with the same methods: whiskey, hope, and sometimes a saw. Across the street, the saloon doors swing, though not dramatically like in the movies, more like tired lungs exhaling. The inside is dark, smoky, and loud. The floorboards stick to your boots. A piano sits in the corner, missing a few keys, sounding like it's been drinking too. Men crowd the bar, shoulders hunched, eyes dull. The whiskey they're drinking isn't the amber comfort of fiction. It's raw alcohol spiked with tobacco juice, pepper, and sometimes turpentine. It burns going down, which is the main thing people want it to do. Conversations here begin softly and end loudly. Arguments turn into shoving, then gunfire. No orchestral build-up, no slow draw, just noise, panic, and silence. Most people who die in saloons don't fall facing their opponent. They fall sideways, clutching their drink. The rest step over them on the way out. The sheriff, if the town has one, arrives late. Not from laziness, but because law here travels on foot. The bodies go to the undertaker, and the sawdust on the floor gets a fresh layer. Business as usual. Outside the saloon, children play in the dirt, immune to caution and the idea of germs. They chase each other past hitching posts, dodging wagons and stray chickens. Their laughter is bright but short, breaking into coughing fits. A good day here is one where everyone stays upright until sunset. The cemetery on the hill grows quietly, each grave marked with a wooden cross that leans a little more every year. Disease spreads through the town like gossip. Cholera, typhoid, smallpox, diphtheria. Words people can't spell but understand perfectly. The cure for most ailments is rest, which no one can afford, or whiskey, which no one should trust. A fever can empty half a town. Outbreaks burn fast, like fires without smoke. The lucky ones live. The unlucky ones are buried before the next wagon arrives. Yet life continues. There's bread to bake, wood to chop, news to tell, even if it's bad. You pass the blacksmith's shop, the air thick with heat and the smell of iron. Sparks fly, ringing against the anvil. The smith's arms shine with sweat and soot. You wonder how his lungs are still working. He grins through the grime. "Good day," he says, which it isn't, but it's what people say. His grin shows two gold teeth, both probably earned through other people's pain. You nod and move on. At the end of the street stands the church. Its steeple leans a little, but it still points upward, as if stubbornness counts as faith. Inside it's quiet, the air smelling of wood polish and candle smoke. The pews creak under the weight of everyone's exhaustion. Here, prayers sound less like praise and more like negotiations. Outside, the wind shifts, carrying dust into every crack of the building. Even holiness can't keep the frontier out. By late afternoon, the town glows in the fading sun, a soft orange on rough wood. From this distance, it almost looks beautiful. The roofs catch the light, the dust turns golden, and for a few minutes, the ugliness hides. You think about the people inside, tired, coughing, drinking, hoping. They've built a civilization out of noise and necessity. It isn't much, but it's theirs. As you head back toward your cabin, the air cools and the horizon swallows the town behind you. The sound of hammering fades into the sound of crickets. You breathe in the dusk and realize the truth of this place. Civilization didn't tame the West. It just found new ways to be sick in it. Still, there's something strangely human in the attempt. The light fades. A single lantern flickers in the distance. The night wind smells faintly of smoke, dust and bread cooling somewhere unseen. You think for a moment that maybe people didn't come west for gold or glory. They came to prove that they could live anywhere, even here. The town coughs behind you, and the stars come out ahead. If we follow the thread a little further, medicine itself becomes the next gamble. Less healing art, more experimental comedy with tragic results. The frontier was a place where you could die of nearly anything: the weather, bad whiskey, or your doctor's best intentions. Medicine here was less a science and more a performance art, and every small town had its own local cast. The barber cut hair, extracted teeth, and performed surgery in the same chair using the same tools, and sometimes without washing in between. If you survived, you were billed extra for the inconvenience. There were doctors too, or at least people who said they were. No one checked. A man could print himself a certificate, buy a saw, and hang a sign. Experience wasn't mandatory, confidence was. That's how medicine earned its frontier reputation, a mixture of courage, improvisation, and ingredients best left unspoken. There were powders, potions, tonics, and syrups, each promising miracles and delivering stories. They fought infection by adding poison and hoping for balance. Mercury was a favourite cure-all, though no one knew why. The theory went something like this. If it burns your throat and makes you sweat, it must be working. Some patients got better, others didn't, and both results were taken as proof. Arsenic had its fans too. Taken in small amounts, it brightened the complexion. Taken in large amounts, it solved all future medical concerns. The bottles looked the same either way. Pain relief was another creative field. Laudanum, a syrup made from opium and alcohol, was available everywhere, prescribed for toothaches, insomnia, heartbreak, and occasionally babies. It dulled the pain and most other emotions too. Add enough sugar, and it tasted like peace. Entire towns quietly drifted through their days in a mild, dreamlike haze. If you stopped taking it, life returned, louder, heavier, and not worth the effort. Addiction wasn't considered a problem yet. It was just personality. Surgery happened wherever there was light and a strong stomach. The patient sat still, or was held down, while the doctor worked quickly. Whiskey helped with both courage and sanitation, though not necessarily in that order. A single knife, a boiling kettle, and steady hands. That was all you needed. Some doctors owned real instruments, shiny and expensive. Others used whatever was nearby: a carpenter's saw, a kitchen knife, a smile. Anesthesia existed, but rarely arrived on time. Screaming was free. Dentistry was worse. Teeth didn't just ache, they rebelled. Cavities turned into infections, infections turned into fevers, and soon your jaw was plotting your demise. The barber dentist offered a solution. Grip the chair, close your eyes, and hope the rope around your head didn't break. He'd yank hard, maybe twice, and hold up the tooth like a trophy. Blood was a good sign. It meant you were still alive. You rinsed with whiskey, he wiped his hands on the towel he'd used all week, and the appointment was over. A healthy smile, briefly. Women had their own hazards. Pregnancy was a coin toss. Midwives did what they could, with boiled rags and whispered prayers. Infection often came days later, silent and certain. The body turned against itself, and the family held vigil. No one blamed the midwife. They blamed the weather, or fate, or maybe the moon. It was easier than questioning the only person who'd tried to help. Maternal mortality wasn't measured in numbers, just in empty chairs. Even childbirth without tragedy left scars. There were no painkillers beyond a shot of whiskey, and no rest afterward. The next morning, the same woman who had given birth might be carrying water or milking cows. Life didn't pause for recovery. The land had no patience for biology. The phrase resting mother would have sounded like a joke. When medicine failed, which was often, people turned to remedies that sounded more like hope than healing. They carried charms against fever, burned herbs for bad spirits, and applied poultices made of substances better suited for building houses than curing bodies. Turpentine, lard, vinegar and honey all had their fans. One recipe for lung trouble suggested mixing soot with bear grease. It worked mainly by convincing the patient they'd already survived worse. Patent medicines were the real success story. Travelling salesmen appeared with wagons full of brightly labelled bottles, each claiming to cure everything. The names were wonderful: Dr. Miracle's Elixir, Electric Bitters, Cactus Compound for the Blood. They all shared two ingredients: alcohol and imagination. You'd take a sip, feel the burn, and believe briefly that you'd outsmarted death. Then you'd buy another bottle, just in case. There were good doctors, of course, as a few, dedicated, educated, and terribly underpaid. They rode miles through storms to deliver babies or amputate limbs, arriving with frost on their beards and hope in their bags. They meant well. Meaning well didn't always help. Without germ theory, they reused instruments, wiped their hands on aprons, and went from one feverish house to the next. They wondered why everyone seemed to die in the same pattern. It would take decades for anyone to notice the connection between cleanliness and survival. Until then, the graveyards kept learning new names. Sometimes the cure killed faster than the disease, sometimes it didn't. No one knew which until it happened. But people kept calling the doctor anyway because not calling felt like giving up. Hope, it turned out, was the most reliable medicine and the most expensive. By evening, the doctor sits on his porch, boots off, eyes half closed. He's done his rounds, pulled a tooth, set a bone, buried a patient. His hands tremble slightly, whether from fatigue or conscience, no one knows. He pours a drink, the same one he prescribes for everything, and stares into the sunset. It's the same orange glow every evening, warm and indifferent. The town quiets. Somewhere a child coughs, and the sound carries far. Tomorrow there will be more patients. There always are. Medicine in the West wasn't about healing. It was about surviving the attempt. And somehow that counted as progress. Our quiet exploration now turns to those who carried the heavier share of that progress. The women who worked twice and ate less. Out here, the measure of a woman's life isn't years. It's the number of winters she's survived, the number of children she's buried, and the number of meals she's gone without so someone else could eat. On the frontier, every woman was two people at once, the worker who held everything together and the ghost who was never given credit for it. You might think strength was admired here. It was mostly assumed. Morning begins before the sun. The air is still grey, and the only sound is the scrape of kindling against the hearth. A woman's day starts in silence, feeding the fire, feeding the animals, and then feeding everyone else. She moves through the house with a kind of practiced invisibility, the soft rhythm of someone who's done this 1,000 times and expects to do it 1,000 more. She makes bread if there's flour, porridge if there isn't. The smell of smoke and boiled grain clings to her hair, her clothes, her sleep. Her hands are already raw before the first light hits the window. She works beside her husband in the field, or alone if he's gone, and men are gone often, chasing work, chasing dreams, sometimes chasing nothing at all. She plants waters and weeds with hands that used to play piano, or write letters, or just rest. Her face is wrapped in cloth to keep out dust and judgment. The sun cracks her skin, the wind frays her patience, and by the time the chores are done, the day has only started. She carries water from a well that's too far away, hauls laundry to a stream, and scrubs until the water turns grey. Her children follow her, small shadows learning too soon how work replaces childhood. When sickness comes, and it always comes, she's the nurse, the doctor, the priest, and the gravedigger. She boils water, lays cloth on fevered foreheads, whispers lullabies into the silence. She holds her breath when the coughing starts. Sometimes the coughing stops, and that's worse. There's no time to mourn, the livestock still need feeding, the bread still needs baking, the living still need her to keep pretending that everything can continue. Pregnancy is another kind of work, one that doesn't stop when labour begins. There's no hospital, no doctor, sometimes not even a neighbour. A midwife might come, if the weather allows. She brings hot water, old cloth, and steady hands. There are no guarantees, not for the mother, not for the child. Some women pray, others just hold on and hope. The odds are cruel. For every 100 births, one ends with silence that never leaves the room. The ones who live go back to work by morning. Life doesn't pause to offer condolences, it just moves on, as if endurance were the only proof of existence. At night, when the house finally quiets, she mends clothes by candlelight. The needle moves like a metronome for exhaustion. The candle burns low, smoke curling into her eyes, but she keeps sewing because holes don't fix themselves. The family sleeps around her, their breathing uneven, their dreams unknown. Her own dreams come late, if they come at all. Usually she falls asleep in the chair, the needle still between her fingers. The law offers no comfort. Legally, she doesn't exist as her own person. Her husband owns the property, the livestock, and technically her. If she's beaten, the neighbours sigh but don't interfere. They call it a domestic matter. Out here, storms have names, bruises don't. Divorce is nearly impossible, and even if she leaves, there's nowhere to go. Survival means staying, and staying quiet. Some women, when quiet became unbearable, turned to other forms of work. In towns, the soiled doves lived above saloons or behind curtains, trading companionship for coins and surviving by the hour. It wasn't romance, it was arithmetic. Disease spread easily, and loneliness even faster. These women were whispered about but rarely spoken to. Men called them shameful. Those same men paid their rent. Many died young, forgotten except by those who owed them money or memories. And yet, for all this, frontier women built worlds. They ran boarding houses, opened schools, planted gardens, organised Sunday services, delivered babies, and wrote letters that outlived them. They made civilization happen quietly, without applause, between endless cycles of exhaustion. The letters they wrote to families back east often sounded calm and cheerful. They rarely mentioned the funerals, the frostbite, or the nights spent sitting alone, listening to coyotes howl like laughter. There were moments of grace, a neighbour arriving with a loaf of bread after childbirth, a child's laugh echoing in the yard, a clear night when the stars spilled so bright across the sky it felt like a reward. Sometimes, around the stove, women shared stories, not of dreams, but of endurance. They didn't talk about what they wanted. They talked about what they'd managed to live through. It was the closest thing to celebration they had. By late evening, the chores begin again. The animals need one last feeding. The fire must be banked so it doesn't die in the night. She eats last if there's enough left. Often, there isn't. Hunger is just another task to ignore. She lies down beside her husband, body aching, eyes open to the dark rafters. The wind sighs through the cracks, cold and familiar. Tomorrow will be the same: dawn, work, silence. The calendar changes, but the day does not. It's easy to call these women strong, but strength implies a choice. They weren't strong because they wanted to be. They were strong because everything around them demanded it, and that strength, though it kept their families alive, also erased them from history. They left behind no monuments, only descendants. Their legacy is invisible but undeniable, the stubborn rhythm of people who refused to stop moving, even when there was nowhere left to go. In the end, she closes her eyes and lets the dark take her for a few hours. Her sleep is shallow, filled with half-remembered prayers and the creak of the house settling around her. The candle has burned out. The world is quiet, but not gentle. Morning will come again, and with it the same list of tasks waiting like an old friend who never learned how to leave. From here, the story opens into the strange morality of law and order, how justice tried to ride faster than chaos and usually arrived late. Justice in the Wild West didn't ride in on a white horse. It limped, dusty and underpaid, hoping no one would notice how tired it looked. The movies like to imagine noble sheriffs and clean duels at sunset. The truth was less glamorous, a lot more shouting, confusion and paperwork written in someone else's blood. Out here, law existed mostly as a rumour, and even rumours took their time travelling. The sheriff, if your town had one, was usually elected because he could shoot straight or drink longer than anyone else. His jurisdiction stretched wider than a small country, but his salary didn't stretch much at all. He might spend half the month chasing a thief who'd already left the state, and the other half refereeing bar fights disguised as political debates. Deputies came and went depending on who owed him favours. There were no uniforms, just dusty hats, and the exhausted authority of whoever happened to own a badge that week. When crime happened, which was daily, people didn't wait for procedure. Vigilantes formed quickly, drawn by a sense of righteousness and a need for excitement. A man accused of theft might be tried, sentenced, and hung before breakfast, sometimes in that order, sometimes not. The logic was simple. If he wasn't guilty, he wouldn't have been accused. That's what passed for faith in the system. Out here, justice was less about truth and more about closure. Prisons were expensive, so punishment came fast. A thief lost a hand, a drunk lost his teeth, and a murderer lost his neck. Public hangings were events. Families brought picnics, children sat on fences, preachers prayed loudly enough to compete with the wind. When the trapdoor fell, people gasped, then went back to their sandwiches. Death was entertainment, morality, and social gathering all at once. It was how a restless town reminded itself that order still existed, even if only for a moment. Most crimes weren't dramatic. They were messy, impulsive, and personal. A poker game gone wrong, a cow that wandered across the wrong fence, a debt that refused to die. The myth of the elegant duel, two men facing each other with honour and precision, belonged to fiction. In real life, gunfights were clumsy affairs. Drunk men shouted, missed, and hit bystanders who were just trying to buy bread. The survivors were usually the ones who had better luck, not better aim. No music played, no audience applauded. Afterwards, someone swept up the bodies and reopened the bar. Even so, guns weren't the problem most of the time. The towns were. Too many people packed into too little space, all armed, all scared, and all pretending to be free. Many towns actually had strict gun laws, the kind modern myths forget. Dodge City, Tombstone, Abilene. They all required visitors to hand over their weapons at the edge of town. You'd collect them when you left, assuming you survived long enough to want them back. Gun control, ironically, began as self-defense against drunk tourists. Still, weapons found their way in. Knives, bottles, fists. Anything could become a reason for regret. The frontier didn't invent violence, it just gave it more room to breathe. People carried grudges like they carried dust. Everywhere, unavoidable, part of the atmosphere. A look could start a fight, and an apology could end one, though few tried that method. Pride was a more common currency than gold, and worth even less in the end. The courts, when they existed, met in saloons or stables. Judges were often appointed for their handwriting, not their wisdom. Trials were brief, sentences shorter. Some verdicts came down to coin flips or whoever had the larger group of friends outside with torches. The line between justice and revenge was blurry, mostly because no one bothered to draw it. Law tried to catch up, but the West was faster. For those who enforced it, the job aged a man quickly. Sheriffs rode miles of empty road, slept with one eye open, and learned that every arrest might be their last. The star on their chest was both a symbol and a target. They carried ledgers full of names, some crossed out, some not. Every name meant a story that ended badly. They didn't talk much about it. Talking required faith, and faith was hard to afford. At night the town would quiet but not rest. Behind locked doors, voices rose and fell, arguments, laughter, the occasional gunshot. The sheriff sat by his window listening, waiting to see if any of it required intervention. Most of it didn't. Out here, people solved. Problems themselves, which is to say they created new ones immediately after. Some nights the law won. A thief caught, a murderer confessed. A peace brokered between neighbours who'd stopped remembering what they were angry about. Those nights felt miraculous, though temporary. By morning, new disputes sprouted like weeds. The land encouraged conflict. Too many people chasing too little water, too little space, too many promises. Civilization, it turned out, was just chaos with better handwriting. There were moments, though, when justice almost felt real. A town would gather not to hang, but to help. Building a bridge, raising a barn, searching for a missing child. The same people who'd throw stones at a thief might also work through the night to save a neighbour's crops from fire. Morality here wasn't consistent, but it was human. The frontier never lacked for contradictions, it simply ran out of patience. By dawn, another day of law would begin. The sheriff would pin his badge back on, look at the empty main street and sigh. Dust drifted through the early light, soft as confession. Somewhere, a drunk sang off key. Somewhere else, someone buried yesterday's mistake. The West wasn't lawless, it just preferred its laws optional. When you walk those streets again, you start to see justice not as an institution, but as a temporary truce, a fragile agreement between exhaustion and fear. And maybe that's enough. After all, in a place where survival is the only rule, fairness is a luxury. As the morning wind sweeps through the empty gallows, it carries a new question. If law could be bent this easily, what happened to value itself? To the worth of things and the price of surviving another day? You learn quickly that the West runs on two currencies, dust and desperation. Money exists, but only theoretically. Most of what you need, you trade. A sack of flour might cost a dozen eggs. A hammer might cost your dignity. Prices drift like tumbleweeds, never still, never fair, and always higher than you can afford. Supply wagons arrive when the roads allow, which is to say, rarely. When they do, everything becomes a festival of commerce and disappointment. At the general store, you study the shelves like a gambler reading his last hand. Tin coffee, flour, molasses, nails, candles, bullets, each one priced like a small betrayal. A can of peaches might cost $20, which is the same as a month's wages. You buy it anyway, because you remember what fruit used to taste like, and memory is its own form of hunger. Money leaves your pocket faster than time. The shopkeeper shrugs. He doesn't set the prices, the railroad does, and the railroad answers to no one but the miles. Coins here aren't just metal, they're miracles. You touch them often to remind yourself they're real. Paper money is less trustworthy. Counterfeits circulate like rumours, all slightly wrong. Ink too bright, paper too thin, signatures too confident. Some people bite the coins to check, but even teeth lie after enough poverty. The only real test is time. If it spends, it's real enough. Inflation is a word no one uses, but everyone feels. It's the quiet theft that comes between the harvest and the hunger. Wages don't keep up. A ranch hand earns maybe $30 a month, a miner $40 if he survives. Most of it goes back to the company anyway. They pay in scrip, paper money only valid at their own store. You can buy food, tools, or whiskey, but not freedom. The ledger always ends with you owing more than you earned. The joke, if anyone bothers to make it, is that you work hardest for the privilege of staying broke. People call it progress. You call it arithmetic with teeth. Banks appear sometimes, promising safety for your savings. Then they vanish, taking those savings with them. Trust becomes the most expensive thing in town. People hide money in coffee tins, bury it under floorboards, or trade in gold dust measured by guesswork. A handful of dirt might be worth a week's labour, or nothing at all, depending on the mood of the man with the scales. Everyone lies a little, because everyone's afraid. The economy here is based entirely on hope, and hope has the worst interest rate of all. You start to notice that wealth isn't about possessions, it's about distance from disaster. A full pantry means survival. A roof that doesn't leak is luxury. A horse that doesn't die in the rain is practically divine intervention. Rich men are simply those who can afford to be tired indoors. Everyone else is tired outdoors. The world runs on credit. Not the kind with contracts and banks, but the kind written in trust and exhaustion. You borrow from your neighbour today, he borrows from you tomorrow, and both of you lose eventually. Debt doesn't destroy communities here. It binds them together like rope, tight, uncomfortable, and inescapable. The only thing rarer than money is the ability to leave. Every few months, a peddler rolls through with goods from the east, bright fabrics, books, clocks, and curiosities no one needs but everyone wants to touch. The sight of glass that isn't broken or metal that shines cleanly is enough to make people weep. They can't afford any of it, but they buy anyway, trading chickens, labour, or promises. Beauty, even borrowed, still counts as hope. The peddler leaves richer. The town, oddly, feels lighter for a few days. Behind all this, the railroad looms, the invisible empire connecting nothing to nowhere. It brings goods, takes land, and names towns after investors who've never been west of Chicago. Tickets are expensive, but cheaper than staying. The rails hum through the nights, iron veins carrying money and misery in both directions. You stand by the tracks and feel the tremor pass through your boots. It sounds like progress. It feels like theft. Sometimes the economy plays tricks on you. A drought wipes out the crops, and suddenly everything costs double. A mine floods, and the town's food supply spoils before replacement wagons arrive. People barter candles for medicine, blankets for grain, prayers for luck. No one says the word poverty. It's just called living. And yet, despite it all, markets never close. On Sundays, people gather after church to trade gossip, goods, and grievances. Someone sells pies, someone else mends boots, and a preacher tries to sell forgiveness. The pie goes fastest. A single coin changes hands 10 times before sunset. Everyone leaves with something slightly worse than what they brought, except maybe the preacher. By evening, you count your earnings, a few coins, a few debts, and one lingering headache. You look at what's left on your shelves: flour, beans, a half-empty bottle of whiskey, and the vague sense that everything costs more than it's worth. You pour a drink, not to celebrate, but to balance the equation. The liquid burns its way down, sharp and honest, like the only truth the West ever kept. You think about the word self-reliance, and how it sounds noble when said by someone with a full stomach. Out here, Independence is just the polite term for being alone with your bills. You fall asleep that night thinking about value, how the most expensive things can't be bought. Time, health, decency, mercy, all too rare for markets to handle. The frontier taught you to price everything, but it never taught you what anything was worth. You dream of coins that melt when you touch them, of peaches that cost your future, of a world where survival isn't always on sale. When the sun rises again, the air smells of smoke and dust. The rooster crows unpaid as usual. The day begins like all the others, asking for more than you can give. You pull on your boots, count your coins, and step back into the arithmetic of existence. The trail of this story now drifts into the mines and fields, places where people traded not money, but themselves. The earth, out here, has a cruel sense of humour. It hides wealth under danger, and then sits back to watch who's desperate enough to go looking. The miners were. They came west chasing rumours of glitter, carrying shovels, pans, and a level of optimism that should have been listed as a medical condition. They called it the gold rush, as if greed were an emergency. A mining camp smelled like hope and smoke, mixed in with something metallic and exhausted. Canvas tents flapped against the wind, their corners patched with whatever scraps could be found. The men inside barely slept. They dug by day, drank by night, and dreamed of striking it rich in between. Their eyes grew hollow, as if the gold they searched for had already been scooped out of them. Mining wasn't just hard work. It was work that chewed through the body from the inside out. You dug for hours in mud so thick it could drown a thought. You waded through water so cold it numbed your bones before it numbed your fear. The tools were simple: a pickaxe, a pan, a candle, and the sort of patience that shouldn't exist. The deeper you dug, the less you saw of the sun. Some men spent entire days underground, working by candlelight so dim it barely counted as light at all. The walls dripped, the air thinned, the silence pressed close enough to taste. Sometimes the tunnels collapsed. The sound was brief, a sharp crack, a rush, and then nothing. No time for prayers, no time for escape. Just a name added quietly to the list, and a new man hired by morning. The mountain was never blamed. It was just doing its job. The miners apparently were not. Even for the lucky ones who stayed alive, the earth left souvenirs. The dust they breathed turned their lungs to chalk. The word silicosis didn't exist yet, but the coughing did. Deep, ragged, endless. They called it miner's lung, as if the mountain had crawled inside them to finish the job personally. Each breath cost a little more effort, a little more life. No one noticed how young everyone looked when they arrived, or how old they looked by the first winter. Then there was mercury, the liquid metal used to separate gold from everything else. It shimmered beautifully like quicksilver magic. The miners dipped their hands in it without hesitation, believing it only touched the gold. It touched them too. Their fingers trembled, their minds blurred, and no one understood why. Mercury poisoning wasn't a diagnosis yet. It was just a personality change. The men who went mad were called colourful characters. The West had plenty of them. The rivers paid the price as well. The runoff turned clear water into poison, killing fish, birds, and everything downstream. But no one stopped. The promise of wealth drowned out the quiet protests of nature. You could tell where the goldfields were by how fast the trees disappeared. The hills turned bare, the creeks ran grey, and the air smelled faintly of metal and regret. Still, the fever spread. For every man who struck it rich, 100 more believed they would. They left families, farms, and reason behind, pulled westward by the shimmer of something they'd never touch. When they found nothing, they moved on to the next valley, the next rumour, the next lie. The gold was never the real prize. It was the excuse to keep believing that luck might still be on their side. In that sense, everyone found a little of what they were looking for, even if it wasn't what they wanted. Some towns grew around the mines, built fast and destined to fall faster. Saloons open before churches. Coffins were easier to find than chairs. The population changed weekly. Some moving on, some moved underground. A place could go from a boomtown to a ghost town between 2 paydays. Wooden signs faded, roofs caved, and the silence that followed sounded strangely relieved. Even ghosts, it seemed, needed rest. The miners who stayed long enough to make money often didn't keep it. They spent it on whiskey, cards, or the illusion of company. Fortune was never meant to stay still in the West. It came and went like the wind, carrying dust and disappointment in equal measure. You could always spot the man who'd struck gold. He looked terrified. Wealth was dangerous. It attracted envy, theft, and the kind of friendship that vanished with the last coin. Most miners died poor, surrounded by a wealth of stories they didn't have time to tell. At night, the camp quieted into something almost holy. Lanterns flickered like weak stars. The wind sighed through the empty pans, a sound that could almost be mistaken for water. The men sat by fires, coughing, staring into the glow, whispering about the one who found a nugget as big as his thumb. No one believed it, but belief wasn't the point. Belief was the only thing they had left. You look at these men and realise the frontier didn't just dig holes in the ground, it dug them in people. Each miner left a piece of himself behind, a lungful of dust, a handful of sanity, a sliver of life traded for a dream that didn't exist. And still, more came. They called it progress. You might call it persistence, or maybe madness. Out here, it's hard to tell the difference. By dawn, the camp stirs again. The cold bites, the fires crackle, and the sound of shovels resumes like an unfinished prayer. The mountains watch, patient and indifferent. The men dig. The mountain waits. Between them lies everything the world calls ambition. And as the sun rises over another field of holes, you can't help but think that gold was the West's cruelest trick, shining just enough to make people forget they were burying themselves to find it. The path now carries us toward the open plains, where freedom wears a saddle and smells faintly of exhaustion. If you believed the paintings, the cowboy lived an easy, heroic life, a lone rider, framed by sunset, whistling a tune no one else could hear. The truth, as usual, smelled worse. Real cowboys didn't ride into glory. They rode into blisters, boredom, and bean rations. They weren't outlaws or poets. They were employees, overworked, underpaid, and deeply allergic to romance. A cowboy's day began before dawn, when the air still held the taste of last night's fire and dust from yesterday's miles. Sleep was a luxury, warmth a rumour. He'd pull on the same stiff boots, the same cracked hat, and the same clothes that had been airing out since last month. Washing was impractical. Dirt here was less a nuisance and more a uniform. Breakfast wasn't much of a ceremony either. Pot of coffee boiled until it tasted like punishment. Beans reheated from the day before. Maybe a scrap of salt pork if luck had taken pity on the camp. The chuck wagon cook was king of his small kingdom. Temperamental, profane, and only occasionally sober. Everyone respected him because everyone feared his cooking. The most valuable man on the trail wasn't the best rider. It was the one who could make stale beans seem edible twice. Once the cattle drive started, the real work began. Endless miles of slow-moving, stubborn animals and faster-moving flies. Dust rose thick as fog, coating skin, teeth, and temper. The herd moaned like an orchestra of complaint, and every step felt like walking inside a sandstorm made of sound and manure. Cowboys rode in shifts, circling the herd, whistling, cursing, and occasionally singing just to stay awake. The songs weren't ballads of glory, they were lullabies for cows. Low, rhythmic, repetitive. You sang not because you wanted to, but because silence made the herd nervous, and nervous cattle tend to relocate in violent ways. Rain turned everything into a swamp. Lightning spooked the herd, and drought baked the land so hard even the snakes gave up. Nights were cold enough to make the bones ache, days hot enough to boil thought. When you weren't riding, you were fixing saddles, mending ropes, or scraping mud off boots that might never dry again. The smell of leather, sweat, smoke, and animal blended into something permanent. You didn't notice it after the first week. By then, it was part of you. Accidents were frequent, and medical attention was theoretical. A kick from a horse could end a career. A fall from the saddle could end a life. There was no doctor on the trail, only whiskey and encouragement. Broken bones healed crooked. Infections didn't heal at all. Death wasn't dramatic, it was just quiet. A missing name at the next campfire, a saddle left behind. The herd moved on. Time here didn't stop for grief, it barely paused for water. The pay wasn't generous. $30 a month was standard, less if your employer remembered he was in charge. Sometimes you'd go months without seeing actual money. You were fed, sheltered, and occasionally thanked, which was considered payment enough. Cowboys didn't own the cattle. They simply followed them, like dusty shadows of someone else's fortune. The dream of freedom came with a contract attached, and yet people kept signing up. Because for all its misery, the job carried something rare: horizon. Every morning you faced a sky so wide it made you forget everything smaller. There was no ceiling to your thoughts, no walls except distance itself. That kind of emptiness could feel like peace or punishment depending on the day. Loneliness was constant company. You learned to talk to your horse, your coffee pot, or the moon, whichever listened better. Not all cowboys looked the way the posters promised. About 1 in 4 were black, many of them formerly enslaved men finding a new kind of hard freedom. Others were Mexican vaqueros, the original cowhands whose techniques and words still shape the trade. There were also native and Chinese workers, each one folding survival into silence. The West was less white than the stories ever admitted and much more complicated. If you listened at night, you could hear songs in 6 languages blending into the same wind. The cattle drives followed no straight path. They cut across rivers, deserts, and grudges. Stampedes were the great fear, the sound of thousands of hooves turning chaos into thunder. You couldn't outrun them. You could only ride into them, shouting, waving, praying the herd turned before it crushed everything. The ground shook. The air filled with dust and screams, both animal and human. When it was over, you'd count the survivors, men, horses, cattle, and then start moving again. Survival didn't earn applause. It just meant more work tomorrow. In towns, cowboys were both needed and resented. They brought business and trouble in equal measure. Saloons filled, tempers rose, and by midnight someone always tested whether bullets could solve math problems. They couldn't, but people kept trying. By morning the survivors rode out again, leaving behind laughter, broken glass, and unpaid tabs. Civilization preferred cowboys at a distance, noble on the horizon, inconvenient up close. The myth of the cowboy grew later, after the dust settled and the real ones were gone. Eastern writers turned them into symbols of freedom, morality, and rugged independence. In truth, most were just tired men trying to stay awake on horseback. The frontier's poetry came from people who never smelled it. Out here, freedom smelled like wet leather and regret. Still, when the day ends and the fire crackles under a big sky, you understand why they stayed. The stars stretch across the dark like spilled silver. The herd breathes in steady rhythm, and for a moment, the world feels balanced. The silence isn't empty. It's full of everything you've survived. You sip coffee so strong it might file your teeth. Lean back on your saddle and stare upward until the night blurs. There's no audience, no applause, no legend being born. Just another man under an enormous sky, too tired to be lonely, too stubborn to quit. Tomorrow will come with the same dust, the same hunger, the same indifferent horizon. But tonight, for once, you almost believe in the myth. If we follow the trail a little farther, the saddle gives way to the plough, and freedom begins to look like hard soil and bad luck. Farming, on paper, sounds peaceful. You plant seeds, you wait, and eventually the earth rewards your patience. That's how it was described in pamphlets back east. Wide open land, endless opportunity, a wholesome life under a forgiving sun. The pamphlets left out a few details, like the wind that could strip your fields bare, or the frost that waited just long enough to kill everything you'd grown. Out here, the sky didn't nurture you. It negotiated. The Homestead Act had promised free land to anyone willing to work it. Free, as it turned out, was a flexible word. The price came later. In sweat, blood, and the slow erosion of optimism. A family might spend months building a house from sod, stacking blocks of grass and dirt into walls that looked solid until the first rain. The floor was earth, the roof was hope, and the smell was permanent. When it rained, the house leaked. When it didn't rain, the house cracked. In winter, snow drifted inside. In summer, snakes did. The work began before sunrise and ended after exhaustion. You'd plough until your hands blistered, sow until your back stiffened, and pray that the weather stayed reasonable for a single week. Droughts came without warning. The soil hardened like stone, and the wind turned into a thief, stealing topsoil one grain at a time. If you managed to coax something green from the ground, a swarm of grasshoppers might arrive next. A moving cloud that ate everything it touched. They came in such numbers they darkened the sky. The sound was like rain, if rain could scream. By the time they left, the field looked like it had never existed. Some years brought floods instead. Water rose out of the rivers and poured across the fields, carrying fences, livestock, and confidence with it. You learned to build new fences higher each time, and still the water found them. The seasons weren't kind or fair. They simply rotated through new methods of disappointment. If one year was kind, the next one made up for it. The soil itself wasn't easy. It was thick, tangled with roots, and full of stones that waited for your plough like teeth. Horses strained, ropes snapped, and tempers followed. A broken plough could mean the end of a season. Repairs took money you didn't have and time you couldn't spare. But you kept going, because stopping was worse. Farming wasn't just labour, it was endurance disguised as faith. Women worked the fields too, sometimes days after childbirth. There was no one else to help. They'd harness themselves to the plough when the horses died, or when pride did. Children carried water, weeded rows, and learned early that helping often meant doing the impossible quietly. Education came second to survival. A child could recite arithmetic in the morning and dig graves by evening. Meals were practical, not pleasant. Bread, beans, salted pork, the same repetition that had already worn out the cowboys. Vegetables, when they grew, were celebrated like miracles. Every harvest felt like a coin toss between triumph and despair, and yet, when the first shoots broke through the dirt, people stood and stared as if the world had just promised to keep turning. For a brief moment, belief returned. The smell of new grass could undo months of fatigue. The community tried to help itself. Neighbours came together to build barns, share tools, or rescue stranded wagons. These were moments of quiet generosity, the small social miracles that kept entire counties alive. But kindness was a scarce resource too. A bad harvest in one house meant hunger in the next. Charity had limits, so did friendship. You learned to read the sky the way other people read books. A certain stillness meant hail. A red sunset meant wind. Clouds building in the west meant hope or disaster. No one ever agreed which. People prayed often, but with the resigned tone of customers asking for a refund. Churches doubled as meeting halls, schools, and storm shelters. Faith was both shield and resignation. You couldn't control the sky, but you could at least pretend someone was listening. The years left marks that didn't fade. Hands grew calloused, faces burned, backs bent permanently forward as if bowing to the land. Hope aged faster than skin, and yet, every spring, they started again. Seeds in the dirt, eyes on the clouds, hearts pretending to forget what happened last year. It wasn't optimism, it was habit. You worked because stopping meant thinking, and thinking was dangerous. Some farms succeeded, not by luck, but by stubbornness. Those families became the new myths, the ones who made it. They built bigger barns, bought better tools, and started talking about opportunity again. They told stories that sounded noble and left out the funerals. Every myth needs an ending worth telling. At night, you sit outside your sod house and listen to the wind slide through the grass. The stars are endless, cold, and close enough to feel like company. The air smells of damp earth and wood smoke. You look at your hands, cracked, swollen, permanent evidence of trying. You remember why you came, for freedom, for land, for something that felt like control. Instead, you found a sky that doesn't answer and a ground that argues. Still, you stay. Because leaving would mean admitting defeat, and pride is the one crop that never fails. When morning comes, the frost will glitter like deceit. The soil will be waiting, patient as always. You'll pick up your plough and start again. Not because you believe it will work this time, but because it's what people do when there's no other plan. The land doesn't love you, but it tolerates you. And that's almost the same thing. Earth didn't yield, it negotiated with blood. And somehow, you kept signing the contract. If we follow the story a little further, the farms give way to factories, where the noise grows louder and time itself becomes another employer. If the farms were slow heartbreak, the factories were fast ones. Out here, industry arrived without instructions. One season you were ploughing, the next you were working a machine that never slept. The towns grew around lumber mills, mines and rail yards, new cities of noise built entirely out of exhaustion. They called it progress. It mostly sounded like grinding metal and people coughing. You could hear the factory long before you saw it. The whistle blew at dawn, cutting through the quiet like a sermon nobody volunteered to attend. The air smelled of smoke, oil, and hot iron, thick enough to taste. The ground trembled under constant rhythm, the pounding of hammers, the shriek of saws, the clatter of gears. Inside, it was darker than morning should ever be. Windows were small, walls slick with soot, and the air turned your throat into sandpaper. You learned to breathe shallowly, as if too much air might be more dangerous than not enough. The day began with the whistle and ended with the same. 12 hours between, sometimes 14, depending on the foreman's mood or the machine's patience. Lunch was whatever you could eat with dirty hands. Bread, maybe a bit of salt pork if you'd saved any. Conversation stayed brief. Talking was a luxury and an accident waiting to happen. The machines didn't stop for chatter or for fingers that got in the way. They ate both without apology. Child labour wasn't a scandal yet. It was a family business. Small hands fit better between gears. Boys of 8 or 9 worked alongside their fathers, faces blackened by smoke, eyes already older than their years. They didn't complain. Complaining wasted breath, and breath was measured in wages. The girls worked in textile mills, spinning, weaving, sewing, breathing lint until their lungs filled with thread. Childhood here was just a smaller version of adulthood, without the illusion of choice. Accidents happened constantly. A saw slipped, a cable snapped, a boiler decided it had opinions about pressure. The factory floor was a battlefield where the enemy never slept. First aid meant a bucket of water, a rag, and someone shouting for whiskey. Doctors weren't usually called. If a man could walk, he went back to work. If he couldn't, the foreman wrote his name in the ledger, next to a number that was already too low to matter. Injuries didn't stop production. They were part of it. Wages came late and light. A week's pay might barely cover rent and food if the company paid in real money. Many didn't. Instead, they issued scrip, paper notes valid only at the company store, where prices rose just fast enough to cancel your progress. You worked to buy the same bread you'd baked for yourself last year, only now it came with debt. The storekeepers smiled as they handed you your own exhaustion in smaller portions. Freedom, once again, proved to be a luxury item. The company town was its own small planet. The houses looked identical, lined in neat rows, each one rented back to the workers who built them. The streets belonged to the company, the store belonged to the company. Even the church was funded by donations that came directly out of wages. If you were fired, you didn't just lose your job, you lost your home, your credit, and the right to stay. It was feudalism with better branding. Out here, you didn't own your life, you leased it by the hour. Some workers joined unions, fragile things, half secret and always hunted. They gathered in barns or back rooms, whispering about fairness like it was contraband. Demands were simple: shorter hours, safer machines, pay that didn't vanish before payday. The owners called them radicals, troublemakers, and sometimes criminals. Troops were sent to break strikes, often with bullets. The newspapers called it maintaining order. The funerals called it something else. Still, people kept showing up to work, not because they believed in the system, but because the alternative was hunger. The factories offered certainty, even if that certainty was misery. You could depend on the whistle, the smoke, the ache in your shoulders. You could depend on the same faces beside you day after day, men and women who looked just as tired, just as stubborn. In a strange way, it was a kind of belonging. Shared suffering makes a convincing form of community. The few who managed to climb higher, foremen, managers, clerks, rarely looked happier. They were paid to stand between workers and owners, translating exhaustion into reports. Some carried guilt, others pride, most carried ulcers. The machines didn't care who gave the orders. They demanded the same from everyone: motion without pause, production without end. The West had traded the chaos of wilderness for the rhythm of the industrial drum, and both beat you down in their own way. At night, when the whistle finally fell silent, the town didn't rest so much as deflate. People walked home through the haze, boots dragging, faces lit by the dull glow of coal fires. The air shimmered faintly with sparks and fatigue. Someone's child coughed in the distance. Someone else sang softly to drown it out. The song didn't have words, just the sound of surviving. In the quiet of your rented room, you count your pay and realize it's already gone. The rent, the food, the store credit, all waiting like old friends. You think about leaving, but the railroad owns the only road out, and tickets cost more than your freedom's worth. You drink instead, not to forget, but to make remembering less sharp. The walls vibrate faintly with the hum of machinery still cooling for the night. Even silence here sounds mechanical. Before sleep takes you, you imagine what it must feel like to stop moving, to stand still without consequence. The thought is so strange, it feels illegal. You close your eyes and see sparks, gears, motion. Tomorrow you'll wake to the whistle again. You'll rise before the light, join the others, and disappear back into the rhythm of work that never truly ends. The factory doesn't remember names, but it remembers motion. That's enough to keep the world turning for now. And somewhere, out beyond the walls and the smoke, the land still waits, open, empty, indifferent. For those who could no longer bear the noise, the plains offered silence. But silence, as it turned out, came with its own kind of madness. You imagine the West as wide and welcoming, but the first thing you notice is how quickly it tries to eat you. The trail stretches ahead, a thin line through endless dirt drawn by people who thought maps were optional. The wagons creak like old bones, each wheel complaining about another day of survival. The oxen move slowly, their eyes dull with resignation. They know more about this journey than anyone walking beside them. Dust rises in clouds that don't settle. It gets in your hair, your mouth, your thoughts. It turns bread grey and water thick. People cough constantly, and no one remembers what colour the sky used to be. The noise never stops. Wheels grinding over stone, harness chains rattling, the soft slap of boots against the earth. Someone's child cries for home, but home is already too far behind to point at. Out here, there's only forward, and forward isn't always progress. The trail is older than it looks. The Oregon and California routes are carved with wagon ruts so deep, they'll still be there centuries later, a fossil record of optimism. Graves appear beside the road every few hundred feet, wood crosses leaning, names carved shallow, half the dates unfinished. Sometimes they just read mother or infant. You count them until you stop counting. Death here isn't dramatic. It's routine, part of the scenery, as common as the dust you breathe. The biggest killer isn't bandits or wild animals, it's water, or rather, the lie of water. Rivers that look clean carry invisible death, cholera. The sickness starts with thirst and ends with silence. People drink because they must. Within hours, the fever takes them. They shake, they fade, and then the wagon moves on, leaving a mound of earth that looks like any other. They say cholera could kill faster than thirst. The trail proves it. There are other ways to die, of course. Accidents love company. A wheel breaks and crushes a leg. A rifle goes off when someone drops it. A child falls from a wagon and doesn't get back up. The prairie doesn't keep score. It doesn't even look back. Every grave becomes a signpost for those still foolish enough to continue. People whisper prayers as they pass. The words rise into the wind and vanish. Food runs out faster than anyone planned. The journey always takes longer than promised. Flour turns rancid, bacon spoils, and coffee becomes a memory told at night like a fairy tale. You ration what's left: dry biscuits, beans, the occasional rabbit if luck stumbles into camp. Hunger becomes normal, something shared like conversation. People joke about eating the oxen, then stop joking when the oxen die on their own. Crossing rivers is its own gamble. The wagons sink, the currents drag, the ropes snap. You watch families wade through icy water up to their chests, holding children above the surface, praying their hands don't slip. The air smells of wet wood and fear. On the far bank, soaked and shivering, they collapse into the mud and call it success. If you survive the crossing, you celebrate by coughing for a week. Nights bring no rest. The ground is too hard, the insects too determined. Fires burn low, partly for warmth, partly to convince yourselves you still control light. Coyotes laugh from the dark, a sound somewhere between music and mockery. The stars overhead are endless and cold, indifferent witnesses to your exhaustion. You tell stories to stay awake, tales of cities, of farms waiting at journey's end, of the life that will make all this suffering worth it. Everyone nods, pretending to believe. Pretending is easier than silence. The next morning someone is missing. Maybe they wandered off in the dark, maybe they didn't wake up. Either way, there's a new grave and fewer supplies. The wagon rolls on. Movement itself becomes the only comfort. To stop feels like dying more slowly. You begin to understand that travel isn't freedom here. It's captivity in motion. The land demands everything. Patience, hope, and whatever dignity you have left. The children grow quiet. The adults stop counting miles. The horizon never changes. Only the graves do. Every few days, a hill offers a brief illusion of progress. You climb it, look ahead, and see more of the same. The wind carries the smell of sage, sweat, and decay. Someone says they can smell the ocean already. No one corrects them. Hope, like water, keeps people alive longer than it should. And still, people come. More wagons, more families, more songs about destiny. The trail keeps its reputation as adventure, because survivors tell the stories, and the dead stay polite. Later, writers back east will call it bravery, They'll talk about courage and faith and the promise of a better life. They won't mention the part where the adventure mostly meant funerals with better views. By evening, the wagons circle, fires crackle weakly, someone plays a fiddle, slow, wavering notes that barely rise above the wind. You watch the sparks drift upward, small rebellions against the dark. For a moment, it almost feels peaceful. You can pretend this is just another journey, not a test written by a landscape that refuses to be impressed. The stars don't blink, they stare. Before sleep, you take one last look at the horizon, still glowing faintly from the sun's retreat. You wonder how many people before you saw the same line and thought it looked promising. You wonder how many never saw it again. Then you pull the blanket tighter and lie down among the noise, the groan of wheels, the restless whisper of canvas, the sigh of a world too big for human plans. Tomorrow the wagons will creak forward again, the dust will rise, the wind will sing, and the trail will keep eating. It's what it does best. From here, the story drifts into the night, when even the fires burn quietly and the darkness itself becomes a kind of company. When the wagons stop and the fires are lit, the West reveals its second personality. In daylight, it's all noise, motion, and grit. But at night, the land changes shape. The horizon folds inward, the wind learns to whisper, and the dark begins to breathe. The people gathered around the campfire tell themselves they're safe. It's a useful lie. Out here, nothing is ever locked, and everything listens. The fire burns small, careful. Too much wood draws attention. Too little gives up warmth. Sparks rise like tiny confessions and disappear into the vast black above. The air cools fast, trading dust for chill. Blankets pull tighter. Boots stay on. You lie close to the heat, but not too close. Everything that burns out here has teeth. The smell of smoke clings to everything. Skin, clothes, memory. It becomes the scent of existence, proof that something human still flickers against all this emptiness. Silence doesn't arrive suddenly. It seeps in, one sound at a time, as voices fade and the last spoon scrapes the last tin plate. The oxen shift in the dark, their hooves thudding softly. Leather creaks, someone coughs. Then, just stillness. Your heartbeat seems louder than it should be. Every breath feels like a declaration. You realize the night has its own vocabulary. The rustle of grass, the crack of cooling rocks, the soft rhythm of insects repeating the same ancient sentence. We're still here. Fear doesn't shout here, it whispers. You know there are wolves nearby. You can hear them, somewhere between curiosity and hunger. Their howls rise and fall like questions. Coyotes answer from farther off, mocking in tone, amused at human fragility. Every now and then, the horses snort, restless, remembering they used to be wild. The sound of their unease travels down your spine like cold water, but no one moves. To run would be worse than to listen. Sleep becomes negotiation. You lie still, eyes closed, pretending the noises belong to something harmless. The mind, inconveniently, does not cooperate. It starts listing possibilities. Thieves, bears, storms, the wind itself learning new tricks. You remember the stories. Travellers who disappeared in the dark, fires found still burning beside untouched wagons. You tell yourself they were exaggerations. You tell yourself that a little fear keeps you alive. Then something snaps in the brush, and all philosophy collapses into heartbeat. The stars above are too many to count and too sharp to trust. They look close enough to touch, but not close enough to help. You can see the faint river of the Milky Way, a white scar cutting across the void. Some say it's the path of spirits, guiding the lost westward. Others say it's just another trail people will die following. Either way, it's beautiful and deeply indifferent. Someone stirs near the fire. A mother wakes to check her child, half dreaming, half praying. A man feeds the flames a stick of dry sage. watching the sparks leap like small, desperate thoughts. Another takes a slow sip of coffee gone cold and wonders how far from home he's wandered, not in miles, but in noise, in how long it's been since he heard laughter that didn't echo. No one speaks these things aloud. Out here, words weigh too much after dark. For all the fear, the night has its kindness too. The air smells clean after a long day's dust. The wind moves softly through the grass, combing the world smooth again. The insects keep steady time, a lullaby older than humanity. Somewhere far away, thunder mutters, not close enough to threaten, just enough to remind you that everything remains alive. The body relaxes in spite of itself. The danger doesn't vanish, it just becomes part of the rhythm. Firelight paints faces into something almost holy. Shadows shift, eyelids droop, breathing slows. Children fall asleep first, their small hands curled around scraps of blanket. The adults follow reluctantly, drifting between wakefulness and dreams. Even sleep here feels conditional, a favour borrowed from the dark, easily revoked. Some rest with rifles beside them, others just stare into the embers as if looking long enough might turn fear into understanding. There's an art to staying awake quietly. You watch the fire shrink to coals, glowing like tired eyes. You count the minutes by the sounds around you, a log collapsing, a gust of wind, the steady hum of everything unseen. The night is alive but not hostile. It just doesn't notice you. That might be worse. You think about the word safe. In cities it means doors, locks, neighbours, noise. Here it's different. Safety is a balance between calm and caution, a fragile understanding between you and whatever else roams the dark. There's no promise in it, just a truce. You exist because the world allows it for now. Tomorrow it might choose otherwise. By dawn, the fear fades with the stars. The horizon blushes faintly. Pink, then gold, then the pale blue of morning forgiveness. The fire hisses as dew hits the coals. The first voices return. Soft, tired greetings. The clatter of pans. The low murmur of gratitude disguised as routine. You survived another night without locks, and that apparently is what counts for victory here. The trail begins to move again. Wheels turn, animals grunt, and the dark rolls backward like a pulled curtain. You look once over your shoulder, just for a moment, at the space where your campfire burned. There's nothing there now, no footprints, no warmth, no sign you were ever real against this vast patient silence. They feared wolves. You fear waking up too early to emails. The species changes, the anxieties just learn new vocabulary. But fear, at least, has always been honest. It reminds you you're still alive. As the light climbs higher, the endless sky opens again, blue and cold. The road stretches forward like a thought you can't stop having, and somewhere inside it the mind begins to change shape. The first thing you notice about the prairie isn't its size, it's the silence. The air doesn't echo, it absorbs. The grass moves, but sound refuses to travel far. You can shout and hear your own voice fade before the wind even bothers to answer. Out here, distance isn't measured in miles. It's measured in echoes that never come back. At first, the emptiness feels like freedom. You can see forever. The horizon looks like a promise instead of a warning. The sky stretches in all directions, big enough to make your thoughts feel small and clean. But the longer you stay, the wider the silence becomes. It doesn't stay outside you. It starts to move in. People called it prairie madness, though no one could define it properly. There were no doctors nearby, and even if there were, they wouldn't have known what to write down. It wasn't the kind of sickness you could see. It started slow. A twitch of impatience, a sleepless night, a conversation that ended halfway because there was no one left to answer. Then it deepened. The world didn't shout back anymore. You woke up one morning and realised you'd stopped expecting it to. Letters were the lifelines. Thin threads stretched across months. You'd wait for them like a prayer. When the stagecoach finally came, the mail was dusty, crumpled, touched by too many hands. You'd hold an envelope up to the light just to feel its weight. The words inside always felt smaller than you'd imagined. They talked about rain, about cousins, about the price of bread, little proofs that another world still existed. Then you'd fold the letter carefully and read it again, pretending it had said more. For weeks after, you'd live inside those words, measuring time by memory instead of sun. But the letters came late and rarely. Sometimes they didn't come at all. The wind carried your loneliness better than the postal service ever did. Days blurred into each other. The same chores, the same horizon, the same sky that never blinked. People lost track of seasons except by the colour of the grass. Children grew taller quietly. Adults aged faster than they realised. Conversations shrank to the size of necessity. Food, weather, repairs, silence. Laughter became something you remembered rather than performed. They say solitude builds character. Out here, it built cracks. Women who lived miles from their nearest neighbour sometimes spoke to chairs, or to the kettle, or to the wind itself. Men wandered outside at night just to make sure the stars hadn't abandoned them. A few never came back. The land swallowed people softly without sound or ceremony. No one called it tragedy. They called it distance. You begin to understand that madness isn't a sudden break. It's erosion. A slow wearing down of the edges between thought and silence. When every day sounds the same, you start hearing things that aren't there. Footsteps, voices, music that dissolves when you turn your head. The mind tries to fill the gaps. It paints company where there is none. Some found comfort in religion. Prayer became both routine and conversation. You could talk to something invisible without being judged, which was an improvement over most neighbours. Others turned to drink, or to superstition, or to work that never stopped. Anything to create noise. The quiet could make even chores feel merciful. In some places, they built small gatherings, church socials, quilting bees, barn dances. The sound of fiddles drifted across the fields like proof that humanity still existed somewhere. For one night, people laughed, stomped their boots, and forgot how far apart they lived. Then the music stopped, and everyone returned to their separate silences. The night swallowed the echoes before they reached the next house. The mind started talking to itself. You'd lie awake, listening to the wind scratch against the walls, and wonder if it had something to say. You'd watch the candle flicker and convince yourself it was breathing. You'd whisper into the dark, not because you expected an answer, but because the words needed to exist somewhere. You learned that conversation didn't always require two people, just one and enough loneliness. Some called it the price of peace, others called it losing your edge. But the truth was simpler. Humans weren't designed for this much quiet. The noise of cities had once annoyed them. Now they missed it. They missed footsteps and bells and other people's arguments through thin walls. They missed the small irritations that reminded them they weren't alone in the universe. Still, there was beauty here. Terrible, slow beauty. The prairie at dusk looked like the sky had melted onto the ground. Colours changed by the minute. Gold, grey, lavender, and then nothing but blue fading into black. You could feel the earth breathing beneath your feet. On some nights, when the wind was still, you could almost believe the silence was listening back. And that was enough to make the madness feel sacred. They didn't have words like mental health or depression yet. They just called it feeling strange and kept working. They didn't have therapy, they had chores. And somehow that was its own treatment. Movement against stillness, sound against silence. The ones who survived longest were the ones who kept talking, even to no one. They turned loneliness into a habit and called it discipline. In a way, they invented mindfulness by accident. They learned to notice the small things, the sound of grain brushing against fabric, the warmth of sunlight through the window, the way dust motes floated like tiny lazy stars. They breathed through the work, through the waiting, through the fear that maybe the world had forgotten them. And sometimes, the act of noticing became its own kind of prayer. By winter, the mind quieted again. Snow covered the world in white silence, and even the animals stopped pretending to care. The house creaked like an old thought trying to hold itself together. Inside, a candle flickered beside a letter that would never reach anyone. Outside, the wind howled softly, as if singing lullabies to the lonely. You sit there, wrapped in a blanket, eyes unfocused, listening to the stillness press close. It's heavy, but not cruel. The prairie isn't punishing you. It's just reminding you how small you are in the grand arithmetic of space. You take a breath, let it out, and for a moment the silence feels kind again. Tomorrow, the chores will start over. The sky will be the same. But tonight, the loneliness hums gently, not as enemy, but as something older, wiser, and faintly beautiful. And somewhere in that long quiet, you realize that isolation isn't emptiness. It's the echo of everything that ever lived, just waiting for you to listen. From here, the story turns toward warmth, toward the small gatherings that kept people human when nothing else would. After so much silence, a single voice feels like invention. The West had few tools that actually worked, but people learned to use each other instead. You couldn't fix the weather, or the soil, or the loneliness, but you could fix a roof together. You could raise a barn before winter. You could sit with someone until the grief stopped echoing quite so loud. Out here, cooperation wasn't a virtue, it was physics. When the first families arrived, there was no government, no power lines, no system of rescue, just distance. The land stretched farther than anyone could ride in a day, and letters took weeks to crawl through mud and snow. If your roof caved in, your neighbours arrived before any official help could. If a storm tore down your barn, 10 families showed up with hammers and coffee. There was no committee, no vote, no schedule. You simply did it, because one day your own roof would need saving. The frontier's secret formula was simple: survival equals reciprocity. A barn raising was a miracle of organised chaos. Every man in the area showed up with tools. Every woman brought food. The air filled with sound, saws, laughter, the crack of boards, the thud of nails. Children ran between the horses, pretending to help and mostly staying alive by luck. It took a day, sometimes 2, to lift a frame into place, to turn logs and nails into a promise against the weather. At the end, they'd share a meal so big it felt like victory. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no applause, just gratitude shared quietly over pie and exhaustion. Then everyone went home to wait for the next disaster. The same rhythm applied to harvests. If a field was ready and the family was too small, others came with scythes and hands. They worked side by side until the job was done. No one kept score. The work was the record. The barns filled, the grain was safe, and for one day the horizon seemed generous again. Labour became its own language, a way of saying I see you, I need you, and I won't let you fall alone. Sundays belonged to community too. Churches stood at the centre of every settlement, not because everyone believed the same things, but because everyone needed the same roof. The church was a meeting hall, a schoolhouse, a voting booth, a refuge from storms both literal and emotional. Sermons doubled as weather reports. Prayers were often half practical. Rain for crops, mercy for cows, patience for spouses. The pastor was less a theologian and more a translator between the people and whatever hope they still had left. After service came the part everyone looked forward to, the talking. Children chased each other through the grass. Women exchanged recipes and stories. Men swapped news and small lies about their harvests. Someone might bring out a fiddle, and suddenly the day turned soft around the edges. For a few hours, nobody was a stranger. The isolation lifted like fog, replaced by the hum of shared presence. You didn't have to like everyone. You just had to show up. That was enough to hold a town together. When someone died, the same people who built your barn built your coffin. They dug the grave, cooked the food, and carried you across the prairie one last time. Grief was communal. You didn't mourn alone. You were surrounded by others who understood exactly how fragile life was out here. The funerals were brief, honest, and practical. Someone always stayed behind to make sure the fire didn't go out while the family was away. Death, like weather, was expected. What mattered was who showed up afterward. Children learned early that community wasn't decoration, it was infrastructure. Schoolhouses were built by parents, heated by stoves everyone shared. Lessons were brief and improvised. One teacher, a handful of books, and a room full of children ranging from 5 to 15. They learned arithmetic, spelling, and the art of sitting still while the wind tried to take the roof. The walls rattled, but the voices inside didn't. Knowledge here wasn't about advancement. It was about continuity, keeping the next generation just smart enough to survive with fewer mistakes, or at least better excuses. Even in times of conflict, people rarely stayed angry for long. The land was too harsh to hold grudges. A fight over property lines could end in fists on Saturday, and shared soup by Tuesday. Forgiveness wasn't moral here, it was strategic. The winter would come, and you'd need each other again. There was no luxury of isolation, no technology to replace presence. Friendship was the only insurance policy that paid out reliably. On winter nights, whole families gathered in one cabin to share heat. The air thickened with breath and conversation. Someone might read aloud from a newspaper 3 months old. Someone else would tell a story they'd already told a dozen times. It didn't matter. The point wasn't the story. It was the sound of voices, the proof of life in the middle of the snow. Outside, the wind howled like an animal trying to get in. Inside, laughter answered back. As the years passed, the communities grew roots. Town halls appeared. Schools got bigger. The church gained a bell that could be heard for miles, its sound carrying like an announcement to the wilderness. We're still here. Even as the railroads arrived, even as money and mail and noise changed the rhythm of survival, people still leaned on one another first. Technology would come later, humanity came first. It's easy to think of the frontier as a place of rugged individualism, lone riders, solitary courage. But that's another myth the land itself never believed. No one survived alone, not really. The ones who tried left behind neat stories and short gravestones. The ones who shared their strength are the reason anyone stayed long enough to write history at all. By the end of the night, the church lanterns flicker out. The last voice trails into quiet. You step outside and look at the stars, the same ones everyone else will see from their cabins miles away. There's comfort in knowing the silence is shared, that loneliness divided by many becomes almost tender. You breathe in the cold, the smell of hay and smoke. The town sleeps, but the community doesn't. It lingers, invisible and necessary, like warmth that refuses to fade. And somewhere beyond the edge of that light, the West begins to change, from frontier to fable, from survival to story. By the time the towns had roofs and bells and streets that stayed put, the land had already started to look older. Civilization arrived like a guest who meant to stay a week and never left. The forests were the first to vanish, felled tree by tree until the hills stood bald and surprised. What was once green and infinite began to look like work. The sound of axes replaced the wind. The frontier was being tamed, which mostly meant it was being exhausted. People said they were improving the wilderness. The wilderness didn't seem grateful. Every new fence divided not just land, but memory, who it belonged to, who it used to feed, and who would now have to move. The rivers were no longer allowed to wander. They were redirected, dammed or dirtied, forced into polite obedience. The water still sparkled in the sun, but it carried a new flavour, the metallic taste of progress. The buffalo went next. They once covered the plains in dark, moving clouds, millions of them, grazing like a tide with hooves. Then rifles arrived by the trainload. The official reason was commerce. The quieter reason was control. Take away the buffalo and the native tribes who depended on them would have nothing left to fight for. The strategy worked if you define success by silence. Within a generation, the herds were gone, and the plains echoed differently. Hunters posed beside mountains of skulls, smiling like they'd solved a problem rather than erased a world. Even the air changed. Smoke from the new railways clung to everything, drifting over towns like a slow kind of dusk. Soot turned laundry grey before it ever dried. The smell of iron and coal became the new weather. The west still looked beautiful from a distance. Sunsets glowing across open valleys, rivers glinting like glass. But up close, the details were cracked. Heaven's view, hell's management. No one thought of themselves as villains. They were dreamers, builders, inventors of permanence. To tame nature was to prove that humanity mattered, that a mind and a hammer could make the world behave. Trees became churches and furniture. Stone became walls. Rivers became power, and every nail in every beam whispered the same prayer: we will not be erased again. It was an honest hope, even if it came at the cost of everything it touched. Nature responded in kind. Droughts deepened, floods thickened, blizzards arrived out of schedule. The land reminded everyone that it could still win. Yet people kept building, confident that one more invention, one more fence, one more dam would balance the equation. They didn't yet understand that the earth doesn't keep receipts. It collects. Animals disappeared without obituary. Wolves were hunted because they scared livestock. Bears because they scared people. Birds because they scared no one and made good hats. The songs of the plains grew quieter. Even insects learned caution. The silence that replaced them wasn't peace. It was absence. The same settlers who had once cursed the wild now missed it. They realised too late that danger and beauty had always been the same animal. Still, you can't entirely blame them. They were trying to survive a world that never stayed still. A man could die of kindness as quickly as of cold. A woman could watch her family starve while surrounded by unbroken beauty. To build was to resist despair. To cut trees was to cut fear into pieces small enough to burn. In their minds, destruction wasn't cruelty, it was adaptation. Progress and survival were synonyms whispered over the same fires that burned the forests. The government called it expansion. Poets called it destiny. Nature called it expensive. The land paid first, the people later. Soil eroded, rivers choked with silt. Storms carved new scars across the plains. The miracle of abundance turned into the mathematics of depletion. No one noticed at first. The ground still looked endless. The sky still infinite. It took years before people realized infinity was measurable and already half gone. And yet, at dusk, the world could still pretend. The sunsets were even more beautiful than before, painted in the colours of dust and smoke. The horizon glowed like a wound healing over. The wind moved across the grass with the same gentle indifference it always had. Nature never held grudges. It just kept rewriting the terms of peace. The settlers built their towns, planted their fields, and prayed for mercy they didn't yet believe they'd need. Even now, you can stand in those same valleys, long since fenced and mapped, and feel the old tension beneath your feet. The ground remembers everything. The trees that fell, the rivers that were moved, the animals that never came back. The earth keeps its own kind of archive, written not in ink but in scars. As night approaches, you can almost imagine the land as a courtroom, the mountains as judges, the wind as witness, the rivers as evidence. Humanity stands in the dock holding a broken axe and a stack of deeds. The case drags on forever, no verdict yet announced. The defense pleads necessity. The prosecution says the trees would like to testify, but they've all been turned into furniture. The jury, of course, is made of clouds, and they're still deliberating. When the stars rise, the land looks peaceful again. The noise fades, the air clears, and for a few hours the West forgives its architects. Forgiveness, like rainfall, comes in small, unpredictable amounts. You look at the dark line of the horizon and feel the weight of everything it's had to hold. The dreams, the ruins, the steady hum of hope that refuses to die. The sky stretches endlessly above you, pretending nothing happened. And for tonight, that pretense is enough. From here, our story drifts toward the people who lived inside that contradiction. The many Wests colliding and overlapping, each one surviving in its own quiet way. By the late 1800s, the West was no longer one place. It was many, layered like sediment, each people leaving behind their own colour of dust. To call it a single story was always a mistake. It was a chorus sung in different languages, half of them silenced before the song was finished. The frontier didn't belong to anyone, it just tolerated whoever held on longest. The myth later claimed it was a white man's world, brave pioneers carving order from chaos, but the land itself knew better. The first roads were made by native trails, the first irrigation by Pueblo hands, the first cattle drives by Mexican vaqueros. The rhythm of hooves and hammers echoed in accents from every corner of the earth. If America was a melting pot, the West was the part where the heat was highest and everyone risked burning. The native nations had lived with the land, not on top of it. Their laws came from wind and water, not paper. But as fences spread, treaties multiplied. Each one a promise made in the language of compromise and broken in the language of profit. The reservations that followed were not sanctuaries. They were cages drawn on maps, measured in miles instead of meaning. The government called it progress. The people who lived through it called it theft written neatly in ink. Children were taken to boarding schools to be civilized. Their hair was cut, their names erased, their languages banned. The official rule was simple: kill the Indian, save the man. But what survived of those children was neither. The classrooms taught obedience, the churches taught shame, and the letters home went unanswered. Decades later, the descendants would search for words that sounded like both loss and endurance. Most settled for silence. Farther south, Mexican families watched the border move without moving themselves. The land they'd owned for generations suddenly belonged to another country. Their labour stayed. Their citizenship did not. They built railroads, herded cattle, and raised crops for wages that barely counted. Their music filled saloons, their cooking filled tables, and their stories filled no history books. Their names were everywhere, but their faces weren't invited to stay. Black Americans came west too, some fleeing slavery, others chasing the rumours of freedom printed in handbills and hope. They built towns of their own, carved from prairie dust and prayer. Nicodemus, Kansas, Deerfield, Colorado. All black communities where dignity could finally take a deep breath. But even there, the world found a way to tighten its grip. Banks refused loans, railroads skipped their stops, and droughts arrived right on schedule. Still, the people stayed. Freedom, they learned, had to be practiced daily. The Chinese arrived by the thousands to build the railroads, the very veins of the new nation. They blasted tunnels through mountains with bare hands and borrowed lives. Explosions, landslides, frostbite. None of it earned them a place at the table they'd helped set. When the work was done, laws were passed to make sure they couldn't stay. Exclusion, the government called it, as if discrimination were just an administrative category. The tracks they built carried trains for 100 years. Their names carried nowhere. Every group brought something and lost something. The Irish laid stone, the Italians cooked, the The Scandinavians built churches that leaned in the wind. Women from everywhere stitched the frontier together with fabric and endurance. Laundresses, midwives, cooks, school teachers. Some were immigrants. Some were born into poverty so deep it required geography to escape. They all discovered that the price of a new beginning was usually the end of something else. You can still see it if you look closely at the old photographs. The mix of faces standing shoulder to shoulder, their eyes tired in different languages. None of them smiling, not because they were unhappy, but because the camera demanded stillness, and stillness was already too familiar. Behind them, the land stretches open, pretending to belong to everyone. The newspapers back east didn't know what to do with this reality. It didn't fit the narrative of destiny and triumph. Diversity wasn't heroic, it was messy. So they edited the picture. They printed stories of lone heroes and quiet wives, of noble savages and savage outlaws. The public loved it. The myth was cleaner that way, easier to sell, easier to sleep beside. But under the myth, the real West kept breathing. In the fields and kitchens, in mining camps and boarding schools, in music and stories told under the hum of lanterns. The sound of survival had many rhythms: the steady hammering of the railroad, the chant of prayer in Spanish or Lakota, the hiss of wind through grass where buffalo once stood. The frontier was never quiet. Only history made it seem so. Even injustice here had a strange kind of intimacy. People worked side by side who could barely speak to each other. They argued, married, borrowed tools, shared food, fought over fences, and still depended on one another. Prejudice was real, but so was proximity. Life forced a kind of uneasy cooperation. The world wasn't fair, but it was shared, at least long enough to harvest it. Sometimes, in the rare spaces where music replaced words, equality almost existed. A saloon piano didn't care who played it. A dance floor didn't check passports. In those moments, history blinked, a brief mercy before it remembered itself. By the turn of the century, the myth had nearly finished its work. The many Wests were folded into one tidy story. Brave cowboys, noble settlers, simple endings. The truth scattered like dust. Yet even now, if you stand in the right kind of wind, you can still hear the echoes of all those other voices. The West doesn't belong to any of them completely, but none of them ever really left. At night, when the plains turn silver under the moon, the land seems to breathe differently. You can almost hear it sorting through memories. The songs, the labour, the names carved into stone and erased again. It hums softly, like a place still trying to pronounce itself. And maybe that's what the frontier always was. Not a destination, but a conversation that never finished. A language built from work, loss, and the fragile miracle of staying. From here, the story moves toward illusion, the birth of myth itself, where the truth puts on a costume and rides into the sunset pretending everything made sense. By the end of the 19th century, the West had stopped expanding. It had reached the ocean, run out of room, and begun to fold in on itself. The gun smoke cleared, the trails hardened into roads, and the noise of survival turned into something quieter. Nostalgia. Civilization, it turned out, didn't like silence, so it filled it with stories. The railroads had connected everything now. Trains roared across what used to be wilderness, their whistles sounding like a new kind of prayer, half pride, half apology. Towns grew where campfires once flickered, and the old world of dust and danger became inconvenient to remember. No one wanted to admit how miserable it had been. They wanted meaning, not memory. And so the myth began. Buffalo Bill Cody was one of its first architects. He turned his life, or the version that sold best, into a travelling performance. Buffalo Bill's Wild West show promised reality but gave spectacle. Riders racing in circles, mock battles, brave cowboys rescuing innocent settlers from noble savages who had been hired for authenticity. People loved it. They clapped for violence repackaged as virtue. They believed the West had always been that exciting and that simple. Out east, dime novelists joined in. They wrote about heroes with perfect aim and women who fainted decoratively on cue. Their West was full of duels that happened at sunset, justice that arrived on horseback, and villains who conveniently wore black. It was the bedtime story version of history, easy to follow, easy to forget, and just true enough to sound possible. Readers devoured it. The real pioneers, still coughing from dust and grief, must have wondered which country these writers were talking about. Myth did what the law could not. It tamed chaos. It turned failure into courage, confusion into destiny. Every broken promise became a lesson, every mistake a test of character. The West was no longer a scar, it was a badge. It was freedom without blood, adventure without the bills. The past, once unbearable, became marketable. Hollywood came next. The early silent films picked up where Buffalo Bill left off, replacing gunpowder with celluloid. Horses galloped endlessly, sunsets lasted forever, and dialogue wasn't necessary. Morality was obvious from the costumes. Cowboys were clean, towns were dusty but photogenic, and the women never smelled like they had to share a bath once a month. Audiences sat in dark theatres, miles from the real plains, and learned what the West was supposed to feel like. Reality failed the screen test. In the movies, the cowboy was always white, solitary, and noble. In life, he was usually brown, underpaid, and tired. The myth kept him young, immortal, and conveniently apolitical. The real frontier had been built by immigrants and indigenous labour, by women and former slaves, by people who would never appear in the credits. But the camera had rules. It pointed only at what the audience wanted to believe. By the 1930s, the myth had fully replaced memory. The West became America's moral origin story, proof that hardship leads to virtue and conquest leads to civilization. It was retold as a national fairy tale where courage justified everything. The stolen land, the slaughtered buffalo, the silenced languages, all smoothed over by violins and technicolor skies. A beautiful lie can outlive any truth, especially if it looks good in the frame. The strange thing is how much comfort people found in it. The myth offered simplicity in a world that was already complicated. It gave the East something to admire and the West something to mourn. It let everyone feel heroic without having to prove it. And maybe that's why no one corrected it too loudly. Memory needs maintenance. Myths only need applause. Yet beneath the stories, the real West kept whispering. You can hear it in the old diaries, in the faded photographs, in the way the landscape still refuses to look finished. The earth remembers the smell of gunpowder, the echo of hoofbeats, the language of people who never got subtitles. The myth rides past all that, smiling, waving, certain of its place in history. The truth just keeps walking behind it, patient as always. Modern cities grew on the bones of those illusions, streets named after pioneers, statues of men who never actually visited, festivals celebrating victories that never happened quite that way. Nostalgia sells better than accuracy. Tourists buy it gladly, posing beside replicas of saloons that never existed, sipping lattes where gunfights once didn't happen. Somewhere, a historian sighs. Somewhere else, a screenwriter cashes another check. Still, the myth did something strange. It gave shape to longing. It told people that courage could build worlds, that endurance meant something. Even a false story can inspire truth. The cowboy became a symbol not of the West, but of survival itself, a quiet defiance that outlasted facts. The real frontier was gone, but its idea kept riding. At dusk, if you stand on the edge of an old trail, the air feels heavier. The sun sinks low, painting the sky in gold and smoke. For a moment, it looks exactly like a movie, and you understand why they believed it. The illusion isn't evil, it's just human. People need to turn chaos into story. Otherwise, history never ends. It just keeps happening. The myth fades now, slowly, replaced by documentaries, footnotes, and uncomfortable truths. But every generation finds its own version of the West, some distant place where meaning can still be mined from hardship. Maybe that's what the frontier really was all along. The human habit of looking backward at pain and calling it destiny. As the last light fades, you can almost hear applause. The ghosts of audiences cheering for a story that promised everything and explained nothing. The curtain falls, the credits roll. The West at last has learned how to perform itself, and behind the stage lights the real land still waits, quiet, scarred, and strangely forgiving. From here, the story softens into twilight, toward the people who survived the myths and the quiet endurance they left behind. When the noise faded, the dust settled, and the myth began to tire of its own echo, the West was left with something quieter. The people who stayed. Not the legends, not the outlaws, not the storytellers, but the ordinary souls who simply refused to leave. They didn't carve history into stone. They let it breathe through their work, their silence, and the soft persistence of daily life. The frontier didn't end with a gunshot or a treaty. It ended the way most things do, with exhaustion. The railroad stopped expanding. The land had been fenced, ploughed, and divided until there was nothing left to claim. The wild became property. And yet, under all the paperwork and mythology, something continued to live, a faint rhythm of endurance that no story could quite erase. You can still feel it, even now, in the small towns scattered across the plains, a gas station where the clerk greets every stranger like a neighbour, a church bell that rings for services even when no one comes, a field that grows the same stubborn wheat planted by the great-grandparents of whoever happens to own it this year. The faces change, the habit of surviving does not. What survived was not glory. It was patience, the patience to rebuild after storms, to replant after droughts, to keep promises made in houses built of wood and hope. People learned to live with less water, less certainty, less noise. They measured wealth in simpler units, warmth, laughter, and the way the horizon looked when the light hit it just right. Civilization had tamed the land, but the land had quietly taught civilization how to wait. The old dangers turned into new ones. Factories came, then left. Crops rose and fell with the price of fuel. Main streets filled with neon for a while, then emptied into quiet again. The West never stopped changing. It only slowed its heartbeat. But beneath every abandoned storefront and rusted windmill, there's still the hum of persistence. The people who stayed didn't need myths. They had weather forecasts, mortgage payments, and family names that never left the local cemetery. Nature too began to recover in its own stubborn way. Trees returned where they could. Rivers, freed from neglect, remembered how to wander. Buffalo roamed again, fewer but defiant, walking like ghosts that refused to fade. Hawks circled the same skies their ancestors had patrolled centuries earlier. The land wasn't forgiving. It simply didn't hold grudges. It continued, as it always had, indifferent to every flag that tried to claim it. The survivors learned a quieter heroism. They became caretakers instead of conquerors. The same hands that once built fences now built schools, museums, and libraries, small sanctuaries for remembering. The myths softened into heritage, and heritage, when handled gently, became gratitude. Even the word frontier began to mean something different. It no longer pointed west. It pointed inward, toward the stubborn hope inside anyone who decides to begin again. There's a kind of poetry in the way memory lingers here. Old tools hang on barn walls like relics. Diaries sit in boxes, pages yellowed but legible. Faded photos show faces staring straight into the lens, unsmiling but not unkind. They weren't posing for posterity. They were just trying to stay still long enough for the future to find them, and the future did. You're proof of that, still looking back, still listening. Modern life moves faster than any horse ever could. The machines have grown louder, the distance is shorter, and yet, strangely, the same hunger remains. The need to be tested, the need to belong to something larger than comfort. Every generation finds its own frontier, not in geography, but in imagination. Some build companies, some chase stars, some just try to raise a family in a world that keeps reinventing difficulty. Progress doesn't erase struggle, it just updates the scenery. If you stand on the prairie at night, the silence feels familiar, like an old story that remembers its lines. The wind moves gently through the grass, and the stars spill across the sky, the same way they did when wagons creaked below. It's humbling to realize that the same constellations watched over both chaos and calm, over the buffalo herds, the pioneers, the railways, and now the highways of headlights tracing new routes through old dust. The myth of the West still lives, of course, but quieter now, more like a lullaby than a sermon. It hums through country songs, movie reruns, and the smell of wood smoke on cold mornings. It's the idea that people can start again, even after everything breaks, that the horizon always promises another chance, even if the promise isn't true. It doesn't matter anymore whether the story was accurate. It matters that it gave people courage, and courage, once born, tends to linger. You see it in the faces of farmers who keep planting despite forecasts, in the firefighters who guard the forest their ancestors cut down, in the teachers who stay in towns too small to appear on maps. You see it in quiet acts, fixing a roof, sharing a meal, helping a stranger change a tyre on a road where the wind never quite stops talking. The West's last great export wasn't gold or cattle, it was resilience. As night falls again, the world outside softens into blue. You imagine the faint glow of lanterns from a century ago, the same light that once burned in cabins, then in gas stations, and now in kitchen windows where someone stays up a little later than they should. The details have changed, but the feeling hasn't. That fragile mix of exhaustion and grace, the belief that surviving another day is its own quiet victory. The wind still remembers the people who stayed awake to keep fires alive. It moves gently across the plains, carrying their stories not as legends but as lullabies. The West is quieter now, but not empty. It breathes through every person who endures, every voice that refuses to fall silent. And if you listen long enough, past the hum of highways and the whir of distant engines, you can still hear it. That steady whisper beneath everything modern, everything loud, everything temporary. It says only this: you're still here. Keep going. The stars answer in their old, unhurried language. The same light that watched over the first settlers, the miners, the builders, now watches over you. Calm, ancient, and endlessly patient. And that's how the West truly ends. Not with a gunfight, not with applause, just with the quiet sound of the wind carrying onward, still telling the story, even when no one's left to listen.